The classroom was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from 20 small brains working hard. The morning sun slanted through the big windows, lighting up little clouds of chalk dust in the air. At her desk, the teacher moved between the rows. She was a warm woman who had seen many classes come and go. Her eyes, used to noticing things, kept drifting to one desk in the middle of the room. That's where the little girl sat. She was a small thing with hair pulled back into a slightly messy ponytail. She had always been a quiet student, the kind who watched the world with big, serious eyes. But lately, her quietness had changed. It had a heavy, tired feeling to it. For the past week or two, the teacher had seen the signs. They were small, easy to miss if you weren't looking. During story time, the little girl would rest her cheek on her palm, her eyelids drooping. At lunch, she would push her food around the tray, eating only a bite or two of the fruit. Just yesterday, during recess, she hadn't run to the swings with the others. She had just sat on the edge of the blacktop, watching her friends run and scream in the sunshine. It worried the teacher. This wasn't the same child who had started the year, the one who got excited about glitter and raised her hand to name all the colors in the rainbow. That morning, the teacher had knelt by the girl's desk. "Good morning, sweetheart," she'd said, keeping her voice soft. "How are you feeling today?" The girl had just shrugged, her shoulders barely moving. "Okay," she'd whispered, not meeting the teacher's eyes. "Is your tummy still bothering you?" the teacher asked, remembering a note she'd sent home a few days before. Another small shrug. "A little." The teacher had placed a gentle hand on the girl's back. "Did you tell your dad how you were feeling?" The girl nodded, but it didn't seem sure. Her father was a good man, the teacher knew. He came to every parent-teacher meeting, his work-roughened hands holding his daughter's small one. But he worked long, long hours, often leaving before the sun came up and getting home after dark. The teacher imagined him, tired and rushing, feeling a small forehead for a fever, seeing none, and hoping it was just a passing thing. She had written a note, and then another, just saying his daughter seemed tired and might need a little extra rest. He'd signed them and sent them back. Life was busy, and sometimes when you're just trying to keep going, you hope small problems will just fix themselves. Now, in the quiet classroom, the teacher tried to focus on the lesson. They were talking about the weather, about how water evaporates to make clouds. She had asked the children to draw their own clouds on construction paper. "What kind of cloud do you have in your picture?" she asked a boy with glasses. "A cumulus. It's fluffy like a sheep," he announced proudly. She smiled and moved on. The room was filled with the soft sound of crayons on paper. It was a peaceful sound. She glanced again at the little girl. Her head was bent over her paper, but her crayon wasn't moving. She was just holding it, staring at the blank blue sky she had drawn. The teacher was about to walk over when she saw the girl's free hand creep slowly from under the desk and press against her own stomach, right under her rib cage. Her tiny face pinched, just for a second. It was a look of pure, deep hurt, a look that didn't belong on a child's face. Then, as if she was reminding herself to be brave, the little girl took a shaky breath, let her hand fall, and went back to staring at her paper. A cold little knot of concern tightened in the teacher's own stomach. This was more than just being tired. This was pain. She made a decision right then. When the lunch bell rang, she would call the office, see if they could reach the father at work, maybe suggest a quick visit to the doctor just to be safe. It was probably nothing serious, she told herself. Maybe a lingering stomach bug. But she couldn't shake the image of that pained, pinched look. She turned to write the word precipitation on the board. The white chalk made a soft, squeaking sound. Behind her, the classroom was perfectly calm. Then, there was a different sound. Not a cry, not a shout. It was a soft, heavy thud, like a bag of flour falling from a shelf. The teacher spun around. The little girl was not in her chair. She was on the floor, lying on her side between the rows of desks. Her eyes were closed. Her skin, usually a warm brown, had a pale, waxy look to it, like a candle. The purple crayon she had been holding had escaped from her limp fingers and rolled in a slow, lazy half-circle before coming to a stop against a desk leg. For 1 second, the whole world stopped. The teacher's heart gave a horrible, hard lurch in her chest. Then, Every bit of her training rushed to the surface. "Class," she said, and her voice was surprisingly calm, though it felt like it was coming from somewhere far away. "I need you all to look at me. Right now, please." 20 small faces turned to her, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. They had seen their classmate on the floor. "I need you all to be my big helpers," the teacher said, walking quickly but not running to the little girl's side. She kept her voice even, a lifeline of normalcy. "I need everyone to go sit on the reading rug with your drawings. Can you do that for me?" Very quietly and quickly, the children, trained to listen to that voice, began to move, shuffling in a hushed group to the colorful carpet in the corner. Their eyes were huge, glued to the scene. The teacher was already on her knees, the cool floor pressed through her stockings. She touched the girl's cheek. It was cool and damp with sweat. "Sweetheart," she whispered, leaning close. "Can you hear me? It's me." There was no answer. The little girl's chest rose and fell with shallow, quick breaths. She was alive, but she was somewhere far away, lost in a deep, pain-filled sleep. The teacher carefully felt the girl's head, her neck, checking for any sign of injury from the fall. Nothing felt wrong, but the cause was here somewhere. It was in the small body that had been trying so hard, for so long, to tell everyone that something was terribly, terribly wrong. And now it had finally spoken in the only way it had left. It had shut down. The calm voice she had used with the children was gone now, replaced by a raw, shaking panic she couldn't control. Her hands, usually so steady for cutting paper and tying shoes, were trembling as she held the phone. The sound of her own crying filled her ears, loud and ugly, but she couldn't stop it. "Please," she choked into the phone, the word thick and wet. "Please, you have to come. It's a little girl. She's fainted. She's just lying here." She squeezed her eyes shut, but all she could see was the awful map of colors on that small stomach. Her stomach, there are bruises, so many bruises, all over. The voice on the other end, a woman's voice, was calm and clear. "Okay, I'm here. Help is on the way. I need you to take a deep breath for me. Can you tell me your address?" The teacher sucked in a ragged, shuddering breath. She recited the school's address, her voice breaking on the zip code. The operator kept talking, asking if the girl was breathing, if she was awake. The teacher answered, her eyes locked on the child on the floor. The world had shrunk to this tiny space. The smell of wax crayons and floor cleaner, the feel of the cold linoleum under her knees, the terrifying stillness of the small body in front of her. From the reading rug, the other children were silent. They were a huddle of wide eyes and frozen faces. One little boy had his thumb in his mouth, a habit he'd broken in kindergarten. A girl was silently crying, tears cutting clean tracks down her cheeks but making no sound. They were watching their teacher, the grown-up who fixed everything, who had band-aids and answers, crumpled on the floor and sobbing. It was the most frightening thing they had ever seen. The classroom door burst open. It was the school secretary, a woman with kind eyes who was now pale with alarm. Right behind her was the school nurse, carrying her familiar blue tackle box of supplies. "What happened?" the secretary asked, her voice hushed but urgent. The teacher couldn't form the words. She just shook her head, pointing a trembling finger toward the little girl. The nurse, a practical woman in comfortable shoes, was already kneeling. She took the girl's wrist, feeling for a pulse. She pulled a small flashlight from her pocket and gently lifted an eyelid. "Breathing is shallow, pulse is rapid," the nurse said, her voice clinical, an anchor in the storm. She looked at the teacher. "What did you see? Did she hit her head?" The teacher finally found her voice. It was a whisper. "No. It's her stomach. Look at her stomach." The nurse, with a carefulness that came from years of experience, lifted the edge of the unicorn t-shirt just enough to see. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. But her face changed. All the professional calm drained away, replaced by a stark, grim understanding. Her jaw tightened. She carefully lowered the shirt and looked at the secretary. "Call 911 again. Confirm they're en route. Now." Her tone left no room for question. The secretary hurried back to the office phone. The nurse turned her attention back to the little girl, speaking softly to her even though she knew the child couldn't hear. "It's all right, sweet pea. Help is coming. Just hold on." Outside, a new sound began to weave into the terrible quiet of the room. It was far away at first, a faint, thin wail that could have been the wind. But it grew, getting louder and sharper, splitting the normal Tuesday morning wide open. It was the sound of an ambulance. Then another sound joined it, the lower, authoritative growl of a police siren. They weren't just sending an ambulance. They were sending everyone. The sound screamed into the school driveway and stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and tense. Then came the quick, heavy footsteps in the hallway, the jangle of equipment, the low murmur of serious voices. Two paramedics, a man and a woman, entered the room with a controlled urgency. They brought with them the smell of antiseptic and the crisp, efficient air of a crisis. Their eyes scanned the room, taking in the teacher on the floor, the nurse, the terrified children on the rug, and finally, the small patient at the center of it all. The female paramedic went straight to the girl. "Hey there, little one," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. She began her assessment, her hands quick and sure, checking the girl's airway, her breathing, her circulation. Her partner was already unfolding a bright yellow backboard. The teacher, feeling suddenly useless, scrambled back on her knees to give them space. She watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, as they worked. They moved the little girl with incredible care onto the board, strapping her small form in to keep her safe. When they lifted her onto the wheeled gurney, the teacher saw the little girl's hand, so small and limp, dangling for a second before the paramedic gently placed it on her chest. The police officer, a young man with a serious face, had been talking quietly with the secretary in the doorway. Now he approached the teacher. He didn't look angry, just deeply focused. "You're her teacher?" he asked. She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She must have looked a mess. "You found her like this?" he asked, his notebook out. "Yes, she just fell. I checked her, and I saw." Her voice hitched again. She couldn't say it. "The bruising." The officer finished for her, his voice soft. He'd already been briefed. "We'll need the parents' contact information from the office." Just then, the little girl on the gurney let out a small, moaning sound. It was the first sound she'd made since she fell. Everyone in the room froze, listening. Her eyes didn't open, but her face twisted, a brief flash of the pain that had stolen her away. The paramedic smoothed her hair. "We've got you, honey. We're going to help you." They began to wheel the gurney toward the door. The teacher stumbled to her feet, her legs feeling like wet sand. She couldn't let her just disappear. She grabbed the little girl's backpack from the hook under her desk. It was a small, pink backpack with a cartoon dog on it. It felt unbearably light. She caught up to them in the hallway, which was now bright with the red and white flashing lights from the open front door. She held out the backpack to the female paramedic. "Her things?" was all she could say. The paramedic took it, giving her a look that wasn't quite pity, but something closer to shared sorrow. "We'll take good care of her," she said. And then they were gone, pushing the gurney out into the blinding morning sun, toward the waiting ambulance with its doors wide open like a metal mouth. The teacher stood in the empty hallway, the sirens starting up again with a deafening roar that shook the walls. She watched the ambulance pull away, its lights painting the brick walls of the school in frantic stripes of red. Back in the doorway of her classroom, 20 small faces were still watching her. The normal day was in ruins. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, but for the teacher, time had stopped the moment she saw those bruises. A terrible, hollow feeling opened up inside her. She had sent notes home. She had been worried, but she hadn't known. She hadn't known the secret that small body was keeping. And now all she could do was hope they weren't too late. The screaming silence after the ambulance left was worse than the sirens. The teacher stood in the hallway, the flashing lights from the doorway still painting the walls in slow, silent red washes. Her ears were ringing. Her whole body felt cold, like she'd been standing out in the rain for an hour, A gentle touch on her arm made her jump. It was the school secretary. "Come on," the secretary said softly, her own eyes red-rimmed. "Let's get the children settled. The principal is calling in the counselor." The classroom, the children, the teacher's mind, which had been a frozen block of fear, started turning again, creaking slowly back to life. She had a job to do. She turned and walked back to the doorway of her room. 20 pairs of eyes were fixed on her. They were scared, confused, waiting for her to tell them what this meant, if their world was still safe. She walked to the front of the room, her legs unsteady. She leaned against her desk, needing the solid wood to hold her up. She looked at their small, worried faces. "You were all such wonderful helpers," she began, her voice hoarse and scratchy. She cleared her throat. "You did exactly what I asked. Thank you." She took a slow breath, trying to find the right words for something there were no right words for. "Your friend is very, very sick. The doctors and nurses in the ambulance are going to take her to the hospital, where they can help her feel better." A small hand went up near the back. It was the boy who always asked the direct questions. "Is she going to die?" he asked, his voice small but clear. The question hit her like a physical blow. She saw the other children tense, waiting for the answer. She would not lie to them. "The doctors are going to do everything they possibly can to help her," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. It was the truth. "Right now, our job is to send her our very best, kind thoughts. To think of her getting strong again." The principal came in then, her face lined with concern. She was followed by the school counselor, a calm woman with a soft voice. "Class," the principal said, "we're going to have a little change in schedule. You're all going to go with Mrs. Carter to the library for a special story time. She's got some of your favorite books ready." The children, still quiet and shell-shocked, began to line up. They filed out, casting lost looks back at their teacher and the empty space on the floor where their classmate had been. The little girl who had been silently crying reached out as she passed and briefly held onto the teacher's hand, her small fingers cold and tight. Then she let go and followed the others out. When the room was empty, the quiet was a heavy blanket. The teacher looked at the empty desk. The drawing of the blue sky was still there, untouched. The purple crayon was on the floor where it had rolled. The principal came over and put a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay? That was a tremendous shock." The teacher shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I'm not." The image of the bruises was burned into her mind. Who could do that to a child? The words came out as a pained whisper. The principal's face was grave. "We don't know anything yet. The police officer is waiting in the office. He needs to talk to you. And," she added gently, "we had to make another call to Child Protective Services. It's the law when we see something like that." The teacher nodded. Of course, it wasn't just a medical emergency anymore. It was something darker, something that involved the law and questions with awful answers. The thought made her feel sick. In the office, the young police officer was sitting with a cup of bad school coffee. He stood up when she came in. He looked tired already, and it wasn't even lunchtime. "Ma'am," he said, "I know this is difficult. Can you walk me through exactly what you saw from the beginning?" So she did. Her voice was flat and tired as she described the past 2 weeks. The tiredness, the picking at food, the notes home. She described the moment the girl fell, the sound it made. And then, her voice dropping to almost nothing, she described lifting the shirt. "The colors," she said, staring at the speckled pattern on the office floor. "They weren't from one fall. There were old yellow ones and new dark purple ones. And in the middle, it was swollen. It looked hot." The officer wrote it all down, his pen scratching against the paper. He asked for the father's contact information from the office files. They pulled the emergency card. The father's work number was listed at a busy downtown restaurant. The principal dialed, her hand steady. The teacher listened, holding her breath. The principal identified herself, her voice professional and calm. Then she paused, listening. "I need you to come to the school right away," she said. "It's about your daughter." There's been a medical emergency. She paused again, and her voice became even softer, the voice you use to deliver the worst news. Sir, she's on her way to City General Hospital. You need to go there now. An ambulance took her. The teacher could imagine the scene on the other end of the line. The noisy kitchen, the clatter of pans suddenly going silent for the man holding the phone, the world narrowing to those terrible words. Ambulance, hospital. After hanging up, the principal looked at the teacher and the officer. He's on his way. He sounded shattered. Just then, the front door of the school buzzed open. A woman in a simple, professional suit walked in, carrying a leather folder. She had a kind but no-nonsense face. The principal greeted her quietly. This was the social worker from Child Protective Services. The teacher's heart sank further. This made it all so real, so official. The little girl's life was now a file in a folder, a case to be investigated. The social worker asked to speak with the teacher alone. They went into a small, quiet conference room. The social worker didn't smile, but her eyes were not unkind. You did the right thing, she said first. Calling immediately, telling us what you saw. You are that child's voice right now. She asked her own set of questions, many similar to the police officers, but with a different focus. She asked about the father. Had the teacher ever met him? What were those interactions like? Had the child ever said anything about being hurt? Had she ever seemed afraid to go home? The teacher answered as best she could. The father had always seemed loving but rushed. The girl never spoke of being scared. She just seemed unwell. The social worker listened, writing notes, her face impossible to read. When the conversation was over, the social worker stood. I'm heading to the hospital now. Our first priority is the child's medical well-being. We will work with the doctors and speak with the father there. The teacher was left alone in the conference room. The clock ticked. She thought of the father, racing across town. His mind a storm of fear and guilt and confusion. She thought of the little girl, in a bright, sterile emergency room, surrounded by strangers. And she thought of those bruises, a silent, screaming story written on skin. She put her head in her hands. There were no more tears left, just a deep, aching hollow. The morning had started with weather lessons and crayon clouds. Now it was a puzzle of pain, and she couldn't see where any of the pieces fit. All she knew for certain was that a very small, very quiet girl had been carrying a terrible pain, and now, finally, everyone knew. The emergency room at City General was a world of its own. It was a bright, humming place of sharp smells, beeping machines, and a low, constant murmur of tense voices. The little girl was just a small shape in the middle of a big, white bed in a curtained-off area. Wires and tubes, thin as spaghetti, seemed to tether her to the machines that blinked and whispered around her. An oxygen tube sat under her nose. A bright blue hospital bracelet, far too big, swam on her tiny wrist. Doctors and nurses moved around her with a quiet, focused energy. They spoke in short, professional phrases. They checked screens, adjusted 4 bags, and wrote on clipboards. The female paramedic who had ridden in the ambulance stood nearby, giving a report to a doctor with a kind, tired face. She presented unconscious at the scene, the paramedic said.
Șalau resepe, rapid pulse.
Significant bruising to the abdomen upon visual inspection by the teacher. No noted external head trauma from the fall. The doctor, whose name tag read Dr. Amin, nodded. He gently pulled back the thin hospital blanket and lifted the little girl's gown. A soft hiss escaped his lips, not of shock, but of grim understanding. The bruises looked even more alarming under the harsh fluorescent lights. A violent, sprawling galaxy across her pale skin. The swollen, tight area in the center was an angry, hot red. This is not trauma from a single event, Dr. Amin said quietly to the nurse beside him. This is something internal. We need a full blood panel, stat. I want an ultrasound of her abdomen immediately, and page surgery, just in case. Just then, the curtain rings rattled sharply as someone pushed through. The girl's father stood there, frozen in the opening. He was still in his work clothes, stained chef's pants, and a white t-shirt smudged with grease. His face was the color of chalk. His eyes, wide and terrified, scanned the room and landed on his daughter. He made a small, choked sound in his throat, like all the air had been punched out of him, that he stumbled to the bedside, his hands reaching out but then hovering, afraid to touch. "Baby?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "My baby girl, what happened?" A nurse gently guided him to a chair by the bed. "Sir, please have a seat. The doctors are taking care of her." "What's wrong with her?" he asked, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. "Her teacher called. She said an ambulance." "What are all these bruises?" His voice rose with a mix of fear and a dawning horror. He looked at the doctor, his expression begging for an answer that wasn't terrible. "Doctor." Amin pulled the curtain closed for a bit of privacy. "Sir, we're running tests right now. Those bruises are very important. They tell us something is happening inside. Has she been sick recently? Complaining of stomach pain? Any fevers? Has she fallen hard?" The father ran a trembling hand over his head. He looked utterly lost. "Stomach pain? Yes, a little, for maybe a week or two. She said her tummy hurt. I thought maybe she was nervous about school or had a bug. I gave her children's medicine. She had no fever." His words tumbled out, fast and desperate. "She's a quiet kid. She doesn't complain much. I work a lot." The last sentence was heavy with a guilt that was just starting to crush him. "Has she been injured?" Dr. Amin asked, his voice careful, neutral. "Did she have a bad fall? Or has anyone hurt her?" The father's head snapped up. For the first time, he seemed to understand what the doctor, what everyone might be thinking. The fear in his eyes was joined by something else. A raw, wounded disbelief. "Hurt her?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Then it got stronger, laced with a pain that was deeper than anger.
No.
"Never. I would never. She's my whole world." He looked from the doctor to the social worker, who had just arrived and was standing quietly near the foot of the bed. He saw the official folder in her hands. His face crumbled. "You think I did this?" Before anyone could answer, a technician wheeled in a large machine for the ultrasound. The doctor put a hand on the father's shoulder. "Right now, our only job is to find out what is making her sick. The best thing you can do is be here for her. Talk to her. She might be able to hear you." The father nodded, numb. He pulled the plastic chair closer to the bed. He carefully picked up his daughter's small, limp hand. It was so cold. He wrapped both of his big, rough hands around it, trying to warm it up. He leaned close, his voice a shaky whisper right by her ear. "I'm here, Mija," he said, using the Spanish term of endearment he always used at home. "Papa's here. You're going to be okay. The doctors are helping you. You just rest." He kept talking, a soft, steady stream of words about her favorite stuffed rabbit waiting at home, about how he'd make her pancakes when she got better, about how brave she was as he spoke. The technician moved a wand over the little girl's stomach, watching the black and white images dance on the screen. Dr. Amin watched closely, his brow furrowed in concentration. He pointed to something on the screen, and the technician nodded, capturing still images. In the hallway outside the curtain, the social worker spoke quietly with the police officer who had just arrived from the school. They were putting together a timeline, a history, the teacher's notes about the child being tired, the father's long work hours, the story of a quiet pain that had grown until it shouted in the form of a collapse. Back inside the curtain, the father rested his forehead against the side of the hospital bed, still holding his daughter's hand. He was crying silently, his shoulders shaking. He wasn't crying because people suspected him. He was crying because his little girl was surrounded by machines, because he hadn't seen how much pain she was in, because he felt like he had failed her. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing him into the chair. Doctor Amin looked at the ultrasound images, then at the first results coming back from the blood lab on a computer screen. He looked from the numbers to the small, sick child, and then to the devastated father holding her hand. The pieces were starting to come together, not into a picture of harm, but into a picture of a different kind of tragedy. A medical one. He took a deep breath and turned to the father. Sir, Dr. Amin said, his voice now carrying a new kind of certainty. We're starting to get some answers. I don't think anyone hurt your daughter. He paused, letting those words sink in. The father looked up, a flicker of desperate hope in his red-rimmed eyes. I believe she has a serious medical condition. It's called pancreatitis. It means her pancreas, an organ in her belly, is very inflamed, can cause tremendous pain. And those bruises, he said, pointing gently toward the girl's covered stomach, they are sometimes a sign of what's happening inside. They can happen when someone is very, very sick with this. The father stared, trying to understand. Pancreas? But how? She's so little. It can happen after a simple virus or sometimes from a medicine, the doctor explained. Her blood work shows very high levels of enzymes that tell us this is what's happening. The pain would have been severe for days. This is why she fainted. Her body just couldn't take it anymore. The air in the little curtained room changed. The shadow of suspicion that had darkened everything began to lift, just a little. But in its place rushed a new, profound wave of fear and guilt for the father. His girl had been in this much pain, and he had given her cherry-flavored medicine and told her she'd feel better tomorrow. He squeezed her small hand tighter. Can you fix it? He asked, his voice raw. We can, Dr. Amin said firmly. We will. We're going to give her strong medicine for the pain and put her on 4 fluids to let her pancreas rest and heal. She will need to stay here with us for a while. The father nodded, absorbing it all. The social worker stepped a little closer. Her expression softened. Their investigation wasn't over, not officially, but the story was shifting. It was no longer a story about a hurt child, but about a sick one. And a father who, like so many, was just trying to keep going, and had missed the signs of a storm raging inside his own little girl. The world inside the hospital room became very small. The beeping of the heart monitor was the new clock. The gentle hiss of the oxygen was the only wind. The little girl slept on, lost in a deep, medicine-assisted sleep that kept the sharp edges of her pain at bay. Her father never left the chair by her bed. He had called his boss, his words a broken mumble. The restaurant, a place of shouting and steam and constant urgency, felt like it was on another planet. The only thing that was real was this room, this bed, the slow rise and fall of his daughter's chest under the crisp hospital sheets. The nurse came in regularly, her shoes squeaking softly on the clean floor. She checked the 4-drip, wrote numbers on a chart, adjusted the blankets. She spoke to the father in a kind, low voice. Her numbers are looking a little better, the nurse would say, or, the doctor will be in after rounds. They were small sentences, but he clung to them like life preservers. The social worker came back too. She brought him a cup of terrible coffee and sat in the other chair. Her questions were different now. They weren't about what happened, but about how things were. Did they have family nearby? Who helped when he was at work? Did his daughter have a regular doctor? He answered tiredly, honestly. No family in the state. A kind, elderly neighbor down the hall would check on his daughter for the hour between school letting out and him getting home from his shift. Money was tight, so doctor visits were only for high fevers or bad coughs. He talked about working double shifts to save for a better apartment, one closer to a park. As he spoke, he watched his daughter's face. He saw, for the first time, the faint purple shadows under her eyes that had been there for weeks. He remembered how she'd curl up on the couch after school, how she'd say she wasn't hungry. He had patted her head and told her she was probably just growing. The guilt was a cold, hard stone in his stomach. The social worker listened. She didn't write as much down now. She just nodded. Being a parent alone is the hardest job in the world, she said finally. It wasn't an excuse, just a fact. The hospital has a care coordinator. They can help you apply for medical insurance for her so checkups are easier. And there's a parent support group, if you're ever interested. It wasn't what he expected. He expected blame, suspicion, hard questions. He didn't expect someone to see the tiredness in his own eyes. He just nodded, a lump in his throat. Later that afternoon, there was a soft knock on the open door. The teacher stood there, looking uncertain. She had changed out of her school clothes into jeans and a simple sweater. Her eyes were puffy. In her hands, she held a giant get-well card, colored brightly by 22nd graders, and the little girl's pink backpack. "May I come in?" she asked softly. The father stood up quickly, almost knocking over his chair. He didn't know what to feel. This woman had seen what he had missed. She had been the one to call for help. A part of him was fiercely grateful. Another part wanted to hide from her, ashamed. "Please," he said, his voice rough. She came in and stood by the bed, looking at her student. The little girl seemed even smaller, surrounded by all the medical equipment. The teacher's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she blinked them back. She laid the giant card on the windowsill where it would be seen. "From the class," she said. "They're all thinking of her." Then she turned to the father. She saw the exhaustion carved into his face, the fear, the guilt. She didn't see a monster. She saw a man who was drowning. "I'm so sorry," she said. It was a strange thing to say, but it was the only thing that felt true. He shook his head, looking down at his worn work boots.
No.
"Thank you. If you hadn't been there." He couldn't finish the sentence. They stood in silence for a moment, two strangers connected by the small, sleeping person in the bed. "The doctor said it's pancreatitis," the father said, saying the new, complicated word carefully. "From a virus or something. Not from—" He trailed off, unable to say the words "not from me." The teacher let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. The terrible, dark fear that had haunted her all day, the fear of what one person could do to another, lifted. It was replaced by a different, profound sadness. It was the story of a quiet sickness, not a loud hurt. "She was so brave," the teacher said, looking at the girl. "She never made a fuss. She just tried to carry it." That broke him. His shoulders slumped and a quiet sob escaped him. He covered his face with his hands. "I didn't see it. I was just so tired all the time. I thought she was just quiet like her mom." The teacher didn't try to hug him. She just stood there, a steady presence. "You're here now," she said simply. "That's what matters now." She stayed for a few more minutes. She told him about the cloud drawing still on his daughter's desk, about how she loved the purple crayon best. She told him the class had a jar where they were putting paper stars with good wishes for her. Small, normal things. For a few minutes, the hospital room felt less like a prison and more like a bridge back to the ordinary world. When she left, promising to bring updates from the class, the room felt quieter but less heavy. The father sat back down. He opened the giant card. Inside, in 20 different kinds of handwriting, were messages. "Get well soon. We miss you. I saved you a cupcake from lunch." One child had drawn a picture of the little girl with a giant smile, standing next to a rainbow. He held the card and looked at his daughter. He started talking to her again, this time about her classmates, about the card, about her teacher's visit. He promised her, in a whisper, that he would listen better, that he would be there more, that he would learn the name of every crayon color in the box. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the hospital walls orange. The doctor came in with the evening update. Her enzyme levels were slowly dropping. The inflammation was being controlled. She was stable. She would need to be in the hospital for several days, maybe a week, but she was going to be okay. It was the first truly good news. The father held onto the word. Stable. Okay. He pulled his chair as close as it would go. He rested his head on the edge of the mattress, next to his daughter's arm, still holding her hand. For the first time since the phone call from the school, the tight knot of terror in his chest began to loosen, just a little. The crisis was not over, but the freefall had stopped. They were in the long, slow climb back. And for now, that was enough. The hospital became their entire world for 5 long days. The rhythms of the place began to feel almost normal. The beeps and buzzes were no longer alarms, just the background music of healing. The little girl's father learned the nurses' names, their shifts, which one brought the best juice cups. He learned to sleep in the stiff armchair, his head tilted at an awkward angle, waking at the slightest change in the sound of his daughter's breathing. The change in the little girl was slow, like watching a flower turn toward the sun. On the second day, the deep, medicine-heavy sleep faded. She drifted in and out, her eyes fluttering open for just seconds at a time. The first time she was truly awake, she saw her father's face hovering over hers, etched with worry and a desperate hope. "Papa?" Her voice was a dry, cracked whisper, almost lost in the hum of the machines. Tears sprang to his eyes instantly. "I'm here, Mija," he said, gently smoothing her hair. "Right here. You're in the hospital. You got really sick, but the doctors are fixing it." Her brow furrowed, confused. She tried to move and a shadow of the old pain flickered across her face. She looked down at the 4-tube taped to the back of her hand. "It's okay," he soothed. "That's just giving you medicine and water. It's helping your tummy feel better." She nodded slowly, trusting him, and let her eyes close again. The social worker visited every day. Her leather folder was still with her, but it often stayed closed on her lap. Their conversations were less like interviews and more like quiet planning sessions. She helped him fill out the confusing, multi-page forms for state children's health insurance. She gave him a list of low-cost clinics near their apartment for follow-up care. She spoke to him not as a suspect, but as a parent who needed a roadmap out of a crisis. One afternoon, she brought a small, brightly colored box. It was a kit for making friendship bracelets. "For when she has a little more energy," the social worker said. "Something to do with your hands while you talk." It was a small, kind gesture that meant everything. It was a signal that the future existed, a future where they would sit together, making something simple and pretty. The teacher visited again, too. She brought more drawings from the class and a stuffed rabbit wearing a tiny superhero cape. This time, the little girl was awake enough to hold it. She clutched the soft toy to her chest with her free arm, a tiny smile touching her lips. "The class misses you," the teacher said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "They want to know when you'll be back to finish your cloud picture." The girl looked at her father, a question in her eyes. "Soon, baby," he said. "The doctor says we have to wait until your belly is all done healing." The teacher and the father talked in the hallway for a few minutes. He told her about the insurance forms, about the plans for follow-up care. He thanked her again, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved her," he said. The teacher shook her head. "We all just finally heard her," she replied. She promised that when the girl was ready to return to school, they would take it slow. She could come for just half-days at first, rest in the nurse's office if she got tired on the 4th day. The little girl was moved out of the acute care room and into a regular pediatric room. It had a window that looked out over some trees. Felt like a promotion. The 4 was still there, but the oxygen tube was gone. She could sip clear broth from a cup with a straw. It was a major event, celebrated by the nurse like a birthday. That evening, as the sky outside turned a soft purple, the father was working on a bracelet from the kit, his large fingers fumbling with the thin strings. The little girl watched him, her eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. "Papa," she said quietly. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm sorry I got sick." The words were like a knife twisting in his heart. He put the strings down and moved to sit on the edge of her bed. He took her small hand, the one without the 4, in both of his. "No," he said, his voice fierce with love. "No, no, no. You never, ever have to be sorry for that. It's not your fault. You were so brave. You were trying to be so strong." He brushed a tear from his own cheek. "I'm the one who is sorry. I'm sorry I didn't see how much it hurt. I'm sorry I was so busy." She looked at him, her serious eyes taking him in. "You have to work," she said, as if stating a simple fact of the universe. "I do," he admitted. "But things are going to be different. We're going to talk more. And you have to promise me something. Promise you will always, always tell me when something hurts. Even a little bit. Even if you think it's nothing. You tell me, okay?" She nodded solemnly. "Okay. Promise. Promise." He pulled her gently into a hug, careful of the wires. She rested her head on his shoulder. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt her relax completely into him. The fear and the pain were finally releasing their grip. The next morning, Dr. Amin came in with his final rounds. He had the latest blood test results in his hand and a genuine smile on his face. "Good news," he announced. "Your numbers look wonderful. The inflammation is way down. How's the pain?" The little girl held up her hand, her thumb and forefinger a little bit apart. "Just a tiny bit," she whispered. "That's what we like to hear," the doctor said. He turned to the father. "I think we can start talking about going home. Maybe tomorrow. She'll need to rest, quiet activities for a few more weeks. No running, no jumping. She'll need to eat very plain, simple foods as we build her diet back up." He went over the discharge instructions, the signs to watch for, the follow-up appointment that was already scheduled. Home. The word sounded magical. The father thought of their small, messy apartment. He thought of her bed with the dinosaur sheets. It was the most beautiful place in the world. After the doctor left, the father and daughter just looked at each other. A real smile, the first one he'd seen since before all this started, spread across her tired little face. "Can I watch cartoons when I get home?" she asked. "You can watch all the cartoons you want," he laughed, the sound strange and wonderful in his own ears. That afternoon, they worked on the bracelet together. He held the strings while she chose the colors and tried to guide them with her good hand. It was a tangled, messy thing, but it was theirs. They were making it together. And for now, in the quiet, sunlit hospital room, that was all that mattered. The long, scary night was over, and a new, careful day was about to begin. Going home wasn't a loud celebration. It was a quiet, careful series of small steps. A nurse helped the little girl into a wheelchair, wrapping a soft hospital blanket around her lap, even though it was a warm day. Her father carried the plastic bag with their few things: the half-finished friendship bracelet, the superhero rabbit, the giant, folded-up card from her class. The hallway seemed very long. The little girl watched the lights on the ceiling pass by, one after another. She held the stuffed rabbit tightly. Her father pushed the chair slowly, as if they were walking through a place that was very fragile. When the automatic doors at the front of the hospital slid open, the world rushed in. The noise of traffic, the smell of exhaust and cut grass, the brightness of the sun after days of fluorescent lights. It was almost too much. The little girl squinted and shrank back into her chair for a second. Her father stopped, letting her get used to it. He knelt beside her. "Too bright?" he asked. She nodded, then slowly peeked again. "It's okay," she whispered. He had borrowed a friend's old, clean car for the drive. He helped her into the passenger seat, buckling the seatbelt carefully around her, making sure it wasn't pressing on her stomach. He drove slower than he ever had in his life, avoiding every pothole, taking turns as if he were carrying a glass of water filled to the very top. Their apartment building looked the same. The same cracked steps, the same faded paint on the door. But it felt different. When he unlocked the door and they stepped inside, the quiet was a warm, familiar kind of quiet. Her dinosaur sheets were on the couch where he'd left them in his rush to get to the hospital. A few dishes were in the sink. She stood just inside the doorway, looking at her home. Then she walked very slowly to the couch and crawled onto it, nestling into her blankets. She let out a long, deep sigh. It was the sound of finally being safe. The first week home was its own kind of marathon. The father had taken leave from work, using every bit of sick time and vacation he had. His boss, who had heard the story, told him to take what he needed. Their days developed a new rhythm, built around medicine schedules, tiny meals of plain toast and applesauce, and lots of quiet rest that he learned to really watch her. Not just to glance, but to see. He saw the tiny wince if she moved too quickly. He saw the way her eyes got heavy an hour after her medicine. He saw the first real spark of interest when he suggested they draw together. They drew a lot. They drew pictures of the hospital room, of the nice nurse with the funny earrings, of the view from the window. He wasn't any good at it, but she would giggle at his lopsided dogs and his clouds that looked like potatoes. The sound of her giggle was the best sound he had ever heard. The teacher called every few days to check in. She spoke directly to the little girl, telling her classroom gossip, who lost a tooth, what the class hamster had done. She made sure the girl knew she was still a part of things. Even from far away. One afternoon, there was a knock on the door. It was the social worker. She wasn't carrying her leather folder this time. She was holding a small pot with a bright green, easy-to-care-for plant. "I thought you could use something green to look at," she said with a smile. She came in and sat at the kitchen table. The official part of her visit was brief. She said the file was being closed. The medical evidence was clear and consistent. This was not a case of harm, but a case of a medical crisis intersecting with a hard, stretched-thin life. The rest of the visit was just talk. She reminded him about the support group information. She gave him the phone number for the hospital's parent liaison, a person he could call if he had any questions about his daughter's recovery or the medical bills that were starting to arrive. When she left, the father put the green plant on the windowsill in the living room, right where the sun hit in the mornings. It was a symbol that someone had believed in them, and that their story was now about growing, not just surviving. 2 weeks after coming home, on a Saturday morning, the little girl finished her bracelet. It was a messy, wonderful tangle of blues and purples. She insisted her father wear it. He tied it around his wrist, where it sat next to his watch, a splash of color against the dull metal and leather. "Now you have a piece of me with you," she said very seriously. He looked at the bracelet, then at her. She was still too thin and tired easily, but the waxy, pained look was gone from her face. Her eyes were bright again. "I always do, baby," he said. "I always do." The following Monday, she went back to school for just 1 hour. Her father walked her right to the classroom door. The teacher was waiting. The class, who had been told she was coming, greeted her not with a loud roar, but with quiet, smiling waves. Her desk was waiting, her cloud drawing still there. Next to it was a new box of crayons with a sharp and used purple one on top. She didn't do any work. She just sat at her desk, getting used to the feeling of being there again. She showed a few friends her bracelet. When the hour was up, her father was waiting outside, just as he promised he would be. That night, as he was tucking her into her own bed, her own dinosaur sheets pulled up to her chin, she looked up at him. "Papa." "Yes, Mija?" "My belly doesn't have a secret anymore." He had to swallow hard before he could answer. "No," he said, his voice rough. "No more secrets. We tell each other everything. Remember?" She nodded, her eyes already closing. He sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing became slow and even. He looked at the bracelet on his wrist. He thought about the frantic sirens, the terror of the hospital, the kindness of strangers, the long, slow climb back to this quiet moment. That it wasn't a perfect happy ending. There would be doctor bills and worries. He would have to go back to long hours at work, but now with a better plan, with the neighbor's help, and with the new insurance. The teacher would probably always look at his daughter with an extra layer of watchfulness, and maybe that was okay. But the story that had started with a terrifying thud on a classroom floor had changed. It was no longer a story about a secret pain or a terrible suspicion. It was a story about a quiet little girl who had been very, very sick. It was a story about a teacher who had looked closer, and a father who had learned to listen. It was a story about how people, even strangers, could come together to hold a family up when they were about to fall. It was a real-life story, not a fairy tale, but a story of a fragile, ordinary love, and how sometimes that has to be enough. And for them, in that quiet room, it was